Could the end be near for Myanmar's military junta? As fighting rages in much of the country, armed groups align to overthrow their unelected leaders. But how united are they? And could we see the balkanization of a country the military pledged to hold together? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Myanmar. It remains a tragic picture in Myanmar, with a military junta accused of serious war crimes, holding on to power at any cost. But citizen militia and rebel groups are reportedly growing in numbers and banding together to fight in large tracts of the country. A group called the Brotherhood Alliance has been making gains in Myanmar's northern Shan state, in spite of China claiming it had brokered a ceasefire there. But the fighting is, of course, prompting more refugees to flee their homes. And they're facing a growing humanitarian crisis in Myanmar, as well as ever less welcome arms abroad. Here's a look.
A nation that once celebrated its transition to democracy is now descending further into civil war. The Brotherhood Alliance, a coalition of ethnic armed groups, has established itself as a formidable force against Myanmar's ruling junta. Since October, they've captured key locations, challenging the military's grip on power. The human cost has been devastating. The conflict has newly displaced more than 660,000 people, a total of 2.6 million nationwide.
Tragically, the frequency and intensity of war crimes and crimes against humanity has only increased in recent months. In the past year, we have seen more brazen aerial bombings and indiscriminate shelling, resulting in the deaths of innocent civilians, including children.
Entire communities have been destroyed by airstrikes and landmines, with reports of arbitrary arrests and roadblocks deepening the crisis. In a twist, neighbouring China has stepped in, aiming to establish a temporary ceasefire.
We believe that the easing of the situation in northern Myanmar is in the interest of all parties in Myanmar and conducive to peace and stability in the China-Myanmar border area. China is happy to see the parties to the conflict in northern Myanmar hold peace talks and achieve positive results, and we are ready to continue to provide support and facilitation to this end.
But despite peace efforts, fighting is continuing unabated, the war echoing across Myanmar's northern Shan state. The Brotherhood Alliance's capture of key trade routes and positions is posing a serious challenge to the military's dominance. Among the turmoil is the persecution of Myanmar's Rohingya people. More than 1,500 have fled to Indonesia since November, testing that nation's capacity and willingness to provide shelter. Anti-Rohingya sentiment is now growing in the country, underscoring a new regional humanitarian dilemma. But in Myanmar, change is brewing, and the unprecedented challenge could just be the force that shakes off the junta.
Well, to get a better sense of what's happening on the ground now in Myanmar is Danielle Perry. She is the deputy head of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Myanmar. She just helped author a report on the intensification of clashes, and she joins me now. Thanks so much for being with us, Danielle. You know, we highlighted the actions of the Brotherhood Alliance, but People's Defense Forces and these other armed organizations are also active around the country. Clarify for us, if you can, how widespread these uprisings or rebellions are and what that means for civilians.
Look, as 2023 draws to a close, fighting between the Myanmar Armed Forces and various armed groups, including ethnic armed organisations and People's Defence Forces, is persisting across much of the country. It really is very widespread, including in some areas that had largely been spared the worst impacts of the current conflict until now. And I would note also the fighting has spread into a number of urban areas, and that has us very worried because of the use of heavy weapons that is happening very close to heavily populated civilian areas.
Yeah. I mean, you've estimated now that 1/3 of the population actually needs humanitarian assistance. That's just... Go ahead.
That's absolutely correct. Unfortunately, the situation here is not improving. We estimate that in 2024, 18.6 million people, or 1/3 of the population, will require humanitarian assistance. We currently have 2.6 million people displaced right around the country. That includes people who have been displaced as part of this recent escalation, about 660,000 of them, but also many people who were displaced earlier in the conflict in different areas, and also some who were displaced many years ago as a result of intercommunal tension and conflict and discrimination in Rakhine State as well. So it is a very worrying situation. We will be requesting close to $1 billion from donors for support over the next year, and we hope to reach as many people as we can, but it is very challenging in the current circumstances. This year, we only received about 29% of the funding we required, and Myanmar really is becoming a forgotten emergency. And for the sake of those who are suffering, we really need to do more.
A forgotten emergency, a neglected conflict. And right now, we know the Tatmadaw has been accused of various war crimes, but there are also reports that various militia are abusing human rights as well. It's as if to say there are no, proverbial good guys necessarily in this conflict, and that civilians are suffering really on all sides. But what do you make of the proportionality, really, of the civilian militias versus the military and all of its might?
Look, I think our concern is really for the safety of civilians, as you say. They are currently at enormous risk as a result of this volatile context. The fighting is really generating significant protection risks, including increased civilian casualties, arbitrary arrests, exploitation, forced recruitment and forced labour. All of these things are a grave concern. People really have been in a state of fear since the military takeover in 2021, and this is now pervasive and is really governing people's everyday decisions, including their decisions on whether to flee. And that is why we are seeing such massive displacement. I think we would call on all armed groups to respect international humanitarian law and to protect civilians.
Yeah, because your report actually mentions, when you talk about that decision on whether to flee for safety, there's also the fear of this forced recruitment that you mentioned.
That's true, and this has long been a feature of conflict in Myanmar, but is definitely worsening. People are very worried about armed organisations on all sides forcibly recruiting them into the conflict. And it is a very deep concern right now for people in these new conflict areas. I think people are very scared, and it really is governing their everyday decisions, and it is very worrying. I mean, food, safe shelter, the need for relief items, hygiene material, water, basic health services, protection support, these are all required. We also need greater humanitarian access to people in need so that we can deliver assistance. It has been blocked in many parts of the country, but particularly conflict areas, largely by the State Administration Council. And this is causing a great distress, I think, for humanitarians who have the capacity to do more, but are unable to reach some areas in the country.
Right. Overall, though, Danielle, do you get the sense that civilians have any sense of hope in seeing that some citizen militia are gaining some ground over the military, or is all of this just too foreboding right now?
Look, I'm not sure I can comment on that, but I do know that people are very frightened. And I think for us right now, we're seeing a lot of people who have deep trauma from the conflict that's happening all around them. And they are in need of all kinds of support. It is also very troubling, the financial situation in the country right now and the financial distress that many people are facing. It is leading families to have to make very tough decisions about how to feed their children and how to really survive in this very volatile environment.
Okay.
And I think it is very distressing for many people.
Danielle Perry, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on the Newsmakers. We greatly appreciate it. Let's broaden out the discussion now and introduce our panelists. Aung Kyaw Moe is a Rohingya activist and the Deputy Human Rights Minister of Myanmar's National Unity Government. From Perth, Australia, is Htwe Thein. She is an Associate Professor in International Business at Curtin University. And from Beijing, Political and Economic Affairs Commentator Einar Tangen. Thanks all so much for being with me. Aung Kyaw Moe, I'll start with you because you seem actually confident that this is the beginning of the end of Myanmar's military regime. Why so?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. And the current development and the current situation has been devastating from humanitarian and human rights angle. But regardless, this is a history that's not yet history in Myanmar. Myanmar people has been determined, committed to be ending the dictatorship for once and for all. And this is more than 1,000 days today. The spring revolutions in Myanmar has started and people did not give up. And we have been making progress despite the cost has been very high. And this is something that have never happened in Myanmar in such velocity, intensity to shake an institution that has been sucking the blood of the country for the past 70 years. And once again, and this has been something that has been very much dedicated and initiated by all people across Myanmar.
Right. As I said, you seem confident that you will eventually succeed, but you say it has been 1,000 days. And the fear among many is that this descent into civil war will get worse and more violent before it can get better. Is that your sentiment as well?
I think when there is a revolution and to dismantle an institution that has been targeting civilian, killing civilian, raping civilian, and using the dictatorship as a tool to govern the people for past 70 years. Again, as I said before, it has been sucking the blood of the country for the past 70 years. It has been very strong. To dismantle such institutions holding arms and military equipment, it's a journey that will consume time, energy, and will pay the price in a different way. But it's not something that's not possible. And we have shown the world it is possible, and we got little to no international support. But the solely support that we got is from the people of Myanmar, and we continue to do so, and we are progressing. We are controlling the areas in different part of the Myanmar, as well as our allies, ethnic resistance organization has been gaining the territory. Just to add, like less than 40% of the total territory is being controlled by the junta now of the country. So this shows how the progress has been made and how it has been tracked.
You say less than 40%? I just want to clarify. Less than 40% you say is being controlled by the junta now. So you think the majority is being controlled by civilian militia, rebel groups, etc.?
Yes.
It's hard to get clear numbers on this. But okay, let me bring in Htwe Thein because, yeah, that's a huge accomplishment. Are you as optimistic about the journey, if that is indeed what the numbers are, as Aung Kyaw Moe was saying? Are you as optimistic about the outcome of this journey? And I mean, do you think the international community should be preparing for this kind of revolutionary shift that we're hearing from some?
Well, like everyone else, I have been optimistic and encouraged by this, Operation 1027, they called it. So this is the first time united assault on the military, and for the first time since the coup started, military looks weaker than ever. Right, so that's really proving these doomsayers wrong, that military is not defeatable. It looks to be very defeatable, but of course the challenges are still there and very early to say. But has given a hope that what was never there. And so the media and international organizations started to be very interested, and tables are turned, and the scale is tipping to the opposition way. So I think this is a crunch time, but the opposition is getting on top of things.
When you say the opposition,
thinly
though,
spread.
who is exactly the opposition that you are describing now? Because there's a fear among some that the fighters in particular now are uniting around a common enemy. The question is, can they stay united, or can that also dissolve into further conflict?
Yeah, well, that's why, it's precarious. The military is known to be very good at and experienced in divide and rule. Mm-hmm. So also it has, powerful friends in terms of, neighbors, for example, China. So we can't tell. It's just too early to say, but what we know is that the military has failed to then, keep friends like Thailand, Singapore, China, used to be the friends that they can rely on for, different purposes. And now they too are having a second, think and saying, could be that military is becoming a liability because of the sheer destabilization, and military has proven that cannot have a control over.
Yeah, let me get Einar's thoughts on that. How much is China a powerful friend of the junta? Because there are reports that Beijing is losing patience with the junta, in part because of criminal networks, online scammers that we've heard of working on its borders, some of which are actually involved in human trafficking. So how much does all that matter to China? How much does it want to continue to back the junta in its power?
Well,
there are two competing things that are going on here. First off, China has this non-interference in internal affairs of other countries, and they tend to maintain relations with whoever is in power. That is not to say that there wasn't a lot of very private griping about the military coup from the perspective that they had established a very good relationship with the government that was overthrown. It has not been 70 years straight. The difficulty here, not only for China, but for everyone else, is defeating the government forces will not necessarily solve it. This is a country that has not been united since its founding. There have been separatists, different groups split by ideology, and also, tribal to a certain degree. So expecting them to come together, there's some concern. If they do defeat the government, will it just, go down into warlordism, one tribe trying to, one group trying to overtake another group? There's no question that the divisions are very deep. This is really the first time that they've kind of come together. But as you asked, what happens if, in fact, they are able to defeat the government forces?
Also, very quickly, Einar, because it's another thing that's been difficult to clarify is whether China did indeed broker a ceasefire in Shan State. Because we're hearing that obviously their ceasefire did not hold, because that is why these militia have been able to gain the upper hand to continue in battle. And then there's also suspicion that Chinese weapons have been falling into the arms of both sides on this conflict. And then it's hard to understand exactly what China wants in that context if both if arms are going to both sides?
You know, China has refrained from any kind of direct involvement in Myanmar. I mean, it's just, but it has a lot of frustration. You know, the border area has become a conduit for illegal activities, drugs, scams, arms, Chinese nationals being used to slave labor, gambling, smuggling, human and arms trafficking. I mean, it's not an ideal situation. The problem is that China has made a number of representations to the military government saying, look, this has to be addressed. There were a bunch of Chinese nationals who were killed, were trying to escape from some sort of scam operation. This has hit the internet. So while China is not actively getting involved, they have, as usual, said, look, we're trying to have a negotiated settlement. Everyone needs to come to the table and you need to figure this out. They're not putting an agenda on the table as usual, and as everywhere else. They're saying, you guys have to figure this out. We just want to get you to the table so you can start and stop the killing. Okay. Remember, it's fine to say that, oh, we're winning. What are you winning? I mean, there are people who are dying here, men, women, children, etc. They will not be coming back. Yes, there are very strong feelings. There obviously some people want change, but I don't think that's going to come at the barrel of a gun. We haven't seen that being successful around the world. We need less conflicts, not more.
Yet the conflicts continue unabated. Let me ask Aung, because as we mentioned, this is of course causing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of more people to flee their homes. It seems the international community has in ways forgotten about the Rohingya, who are still sadly unwelcome in Bangladesh, where most of them have fled to. The government there has clearly stated that it wants them sent back to Myanmar. They're too scared to return. And now even in Indonesia, it has become a political issue as well. People are no longer friendly to refugees from the Rohingya areas there. Where does this leave Myanmar civilians if this conflict continues to spiral further out of control?
The current context in Myanmar is very volatile, and we unitedly trying to do it in less costly way, particularly with the minimum impact on the civilian. It is very difficult to do so. And the civilian and government and its allies are instructed and being continuously trained to respect international humanitarian law and to ensure the code of conduct that's in place to reduce the impact on the civilian and civilian infrastructure. That's first thing. I think when it's come to the Rohingya, the situation is very complex again, and it's not conducive for the Rohingya to be coming back. And there is approximately 600,000 Rohingya inside Rakhine state of Myanmar who are attempting daily to depart from Rakhine state to seek refuge in different countries as such, Malaysia, Indonesia, and others. This indicates the direness of the situation inside Rakhine state alone, including the access to humanitarian assistance and things like that. And of course, in Bangladesh, there are close to 1 million Rohingya refugees are in dire situations as well, with no hope to be returning due to the situations in Myanmar. So this is another big source of departure for the Rohingya choosing this journey.
Okay.
But overall, I think Rohingya issue, one thing I want to make very clear is that very much interconnected with the democratization of process of Myanmar. Myanmar need to be in the hand of civilian and fully democratized in order to find a durable solutions for the going back.
Htwe, I'll tell you what, we're down to our last minute. I mean, having said that, though, the overarching fear now is that Myanmar could be simply fracturing into semi-independent states. That's what the government is actually, I should say the military junta is actually warning about. And the military constitution itself refers to this non-disintegration as a pillar of the country's existence. So could Myanmar effectively break apart?
Well, won't be if we stay united, right? The resistance groups stay united, and all the groups and diaspora and all these military militia groups have suffered, under the hands of the military, and they have learned lessons many times. Military junta has broken promises many times. And then this time they're savvy enough to not to let the military buy them out again. But it will have, dirty tactics that military will use to divide and rule. And this is a time that if unity comes, it won't happen. So now we have proven that this military is defeatable, and the resistance have to continue with that. And then we need international assistance. We're the forgotten people. We're really forgotten people, and this is a time, if they care about human rights and democracy, help Myanmar.
Indeed. Okay. Htwe, that will have to be the final word. So unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.